So firstly, before we go on to verse 9, any questions or comments on this? And then I will deal in some detail with a query that Peter raised about the Anuswara, right? In respect to which there has been some confusion, but hopefully it's a confusion that I will be able to dispel. So we'll do the Anuswara. If there are any other comments or questions or queries, raise them later, raise them at any time. Any time. It's the subdotted M. What does it mean and how is it pronounced? Okay, first of all, distinguish the Anuswara M from a root M. I'll explain exactly what I mean. Let us take the root. Let's take the Vedic root, Cham. You would never ever write that with a subdotted M because here it's full consonant M and it is an integral part of the word itself. The Anuswara M, the subdotted M, is an M that is added as part of a grammatical ending to a word. So it's not part of the root, but part of the ending of a word. Most obvious example we all know is we have stem Buddha, nominative form, nominative singular Buddho, accusative. What's the accusative? Yes, Buddham. Okay. Now, that there is the Anuswara M. It's not part of the root, it's part of the grammatical ending. And another example of an Anuswara M grammatical ending is the genitive plural. So of the Buddhas in the plural, Buddhanam, that also is Anuswara M. And then the question is, how is it pronounced? Let's take. So Buddha. Now let us put that into the accusative. And we have Buddham. Now, this is where Sanskrit and Pali slightly part company, because in Sanskrit, and the reason I mention Sanskrit doesn't have a bearing on what we're doing here. Where you have a word ending with an M there, which as a grammatical ending, we're now looking at the accusative form of Buddha. If it comes at the end of the word, end of a sentence, sorry, end of a line, or before a vowel, it always in Sanskrit remains as a pure M, as if it's written as a full M. In fact, it is in Devanagari and Sanskrit written as a full M, if it stands on its own. What happens to it in Pali? Oh, sorry, let me give you also another. Let me just write, and the Buddha, Let's write this in Sanskrit. Now, I haven't finished yet. What's happened here? We've got the anuswara, which means after sound, anuswara, following sound, the after sound. We've got an anuswara M followed by a consonant. It now, in Devanagari, under the rules of Sanskrit, becomes a subdotted M. What happens in Sanskrit is exactly now what's the same as what happens in Pali. It takes on the same sound as the following budhancha, budhancha. So it's written as, so this would now be written identically in Sanskrit and Pali. Budhancha, but it would be pronounced as even though written as a subdotted M. Equally, if instead of the cha, we have the same word followed by tu, meaning however, the Buddha, however, it would be pronounced as an ordinary N, budhantu. It would be written as an anuswara, but pronounced, it would be pronounced from the same point of articulation as the following consonant, budhantu. Is that clear? Budhancha, budhantu.
The N consonant, not the M consonant.
It would be written as the subdotted M, but it would be pronounced according to where the following consonant was pronounced. So if the following consonant was a T, it would be pronounced as an N because N and T belong to the same group. If it's followed by a Ch, it would be pronounced as a Ny because a Ny and Ch are part of the same group. If it's followed by a P, for example, it's written as, would be written as a Buddham Pasati, he sees the Buddha. In Sanskrit, it would be exactly the same rules apply. In Sanskrit, it would be Buddham Pashyati. It would be pronounced as an M, but what makes it become pronounced as an M there is it's followed by a P. So, written exactly the same in the script, both in Devanagari script and in the Roman script. What happens if it's followed by a sibilant, by a S sound? In Sanskrit, it was called a sh, but let's just look at the s because that's the only one that's left in Pali. By the way, Sanskrit has a s, sh, and sh, but they all become s in Pali. What happens if, for example, he remembers the Buddha, which would be Buddhang Sarati in Pali, Buddhang Smarati in Sanskrit. It's followed by an S. Now, this is what happens. I'll do now separately in Sanskrit. So Buddhang. No, let's use our well-known one, Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. So we'll write it first of all in Sanskrit. Oops, sorry, I missed that. And in Pali, no. So in Pali, exactly the same. It's a s, not the Sanskrit sh. Now, if you are a Thai, you will tend to pronounce the anuswara as an l in all locations. And I've noticed that several of us here, I think a majority of us here who've learned under the Thai tradition will follow that Thai way of doing it. That's fine, there's no problem with it, provided you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. That is not how it would have been pronounced by the Buddha himself. As I think I've said before, we can have a reasonable degree, at least we can make a solid case for arguing that we do know how it was pronounced at the time of the Buddha, because we have such solid evidence as to how the Vedas right from that time and before were pronounced, because that's how they're still pronounced now. What happens in Sanskrit with an anusvara followed by a sa or a sh or a sh? It becomes a nasalized vowel, a bit like the French, la France, the ans. So among the northern Indians, and I've heard a chant from Bodh Gaya, actually. My son brought back after he'd done a chant, but done by local Indians of the Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. And I heard it, but I said, hey, I asked him, said, was that chanted by native Indians, native local Indians? He said, well, actually, yes, it was. How do you know? Because they were doing a pure Ganges Valley pronunciation. They didn't say Buddhang Saranang, Buddhang, it was Buddhang Saranang, Buddhang Saranang. The Thais would do Buddhang Saranang, and in Sri Lanka, also they tend to do before and after Buddhang Saranang. So, when you're chanting Buddhang Saranang, you asked me before the others came in, you said you don't want to get it wrong, which one is right. The answer is, if you are chanting within a Thai tradition, I suppose if everyone else around you is following the Thai tradition, follow them, pronounce that one there with Buddhang Saranang Gacchami.
But here you both would sound the sound, Buddhang Saranam Gacchami, even though the N isn't subdotted on the Saranam.
I'm coming to that in a moment. That's rather easy. But here, if you had, say, native Indians, as I've heard them now from this recorded chant of doing it, and the same way that they do it, for example, when they're chanting Vedic, this anuswara followed by the sibilant, it turns it just into a nasalized, a bit like French, So Buddhang Saranang. However, if you're chanting Pali, as far as I can see, everybody would put a ng there. Now, what happens, this now actually makes it quite easy. For the Gacchami, again, it's exactly the same word in Sanskrit and Pali, Gacchami, I go. And again, so here, you've got the anuswara, but it's followed by a g. Now, if you've got the anuswara followed by a g or a k, it automatically becomes a m sound anyway, because it's pronounced at the same point, exactly the same way as in English. We pronounce S-U-N, we pronounce the sun, but put a K on the end. We automatically pronounce that then as sunk. We didn't say sunk, but sunk. We automatically pronounce it correctly there, like in and ink. Exactly the same happens with the anuswara. It will be pronounced as a ng there, not because that's how the Thais do it, but because that's how everybody does it, including the most pristine chanting of Vedic. It will pronounce that anuswara as a ng if the following consonant is a g or a k. So does this go some way to clarifying it?
It's easy because it's just chanting Thai. Just chant the Thai way.
It does follow kind of naturally in a way.
It does follow naturally.
I mean, if you were to think, how would it be? Buddham, yes. Buddham cha fits better.
It does, yeah. And in fact, if you get the organs of articulation more or less right, it does follow naturally. What often will happen is that, say, and the Buddha, okay, here it can be written in two ways. The standard way is written like that. That would be the same for Pali and Sanskrit. You will often find in the texts But the Budhancha will be written like that. It's equally correct from the point of view of spelling to write either like that, and a swara with a cha, or with the tilde plus cha. It happens only with a very few short enclitic words. Enclitic words are ones that are closely just tacked onto the end of the one beginning. Another one is ti, budhan ti, ti, and the quote. Sometimes that would be written, as you often see it, written like this. Written exactly, avoiding the anuswara, but written as it's pronounced. That only happens, as I say, with short enclitic words like ti and cha. Maybe pi is another. But short enclitic words, then, as it were, treated as if it were one integral word, therefore write it without anuswara. So I hope this makes some kind of sense. Does it make some kind of sense, Eugene?
So could you just run through the variation in sounds of that?
Right.
Of the anuswara M.
Yeah.
Just
So the sound, okay, just running through, the sounds.
Just to get an idea of how it varies, as it were,
Okay.
how the sound varies.
So budhanti,
Yeah.
budhanti, pure N and T, budhanti, budhanja, moranya, because it's called budhanja, budhambi. Now when we get to the asa in Pali, it's going to be budhang sarati. So budhanja, budhambi, budhanti, budhangsa. Followed by an H, by the way, it's treated as this budhanji. It's budhanji.
Right.
Okay, we can revisit this as often as we need, but just let it sink in this time.
Right. Can I ask an ancillary question? Something we haven't looked at all.
Yes, please.
And that's the alphabet. And is the E was the dot, the M was the dot below, seen as a separate letter of the alphabet? Or is it the equivalent of the German A with two dots over the top?
It's kind of the equivalent of the umlaut, A right dots over the top. In the Devanagari script, it would be written as a dot over the. So let me just give you an example here.
See, the dots in German are fairly new.
They are. Whereas the anuswara in Indian languages and the Devanagari and other Indian scripts is not new. That is true.
Well, it wasn't, was it? Because it wasn't written like that. It was only when it was put into Arabic language, well, Western languages.
Ah, in a Western, yeah, in the Roman script, it was just written as an M with a dot underneath,
Yes.
or an M with a dot on top. In some texts, you see it's the same thing. You had to write it as an M, which didn't have a separate symbol for the anuswara. There are dots to the rescue.
So somebody invented it.
In the Roman script, somebody invented it. For example, we have the sound. This is the da. That's the dental da, and this is the same in the Devanagari. We have that symbol, which you can see that's da, da, da. You can hear the distinction of the difference in sound. Da. And when you hear, for example, Indians who've been brought up in India speaking English, and more, I think, in our local streets, you'll hear the sound da and da, because they're doing it the retroflex one. Now, they have separate letters for them, that look different and are different. And for the native speaker, the da and da are two totally different sounds. And they don't confuse those sounds any more than in English we'd confuse the sound tanks and thanks. Tanks and thanks are two totally different sounds. We don't confuse them any more than the native Indian speaker would confuse that. The two, they're so different. Now, but we don't have a separate letter for that. So what do? Put a dot underneath to make up for our deficiency in this letter. So if you look at, for example, I'll write it in Pali. This is now without writing the Anuswara yet. So what I've written here is, as you all recognize it? Okay, what I've written is Buddha Sarana Gacchami. Now, how is the Anuswara? This is in the Devanagari script, in which Sanskrit is typically. How do you write it there? In English, or I should say in Roman script, we're going to write it with the subdotted M. They don't write it with an M, they just put a dot there. Above, top right, above the last consonant. This is Buddhang. And this is Saranang. So it's that dot that means it is the Anuswara, it is the nasal sound. And as I was saying, exactly how that nasal sound is pronounced depends on what comes next. And incidentally, this use of the dot, although the Sinhala and Thai scripts are different, and so an Indian will hardly recognize a single letter of the Thai or the Sinhala, and the same applies to Burmese. They were all ultimately derived from a very long time ago from the Devanagari script, but they've developed their own shapes. But all of those scripts equally use that dot. So the use of the dot at the end of a word for the Anuswara is common throughout Sanskrit, all of the languages of India that I know of, that I've looked at, and equally Thai, Sinhala, and Burmese, I think as well.
So it's like an emphasis.
It's not an emphasis, it's the indication that there is a nasal sound at the end.
Right.
It's the nasal sound. So I'll just let that sink in rather than dwelling on this, and we can revisit as much as you need as time goes on. While we're on the subject of sarana, in Sanskrit, sharana. It's frequently translated as refuge, Buddhang saranang gacchami, I go to the Buddha for refuge. That is a potentially misleadingly partial translation, because refuge, refugium, actually means you're fleeing, you're running away from something. That's the meaning of the word in Latin. A fugitive, refugio in Latin, I run away from something. It does have that as a partial meaning in Sanskrit, but the root of that word is actually a protection, like a protective armor. So you aren't really saying I'm running away from danger to the Buddha. It's to use the Christian terminology, it's more like you are arming yourself with the sword of the spirit. So I go to the Buddha for my armor. So in other words, it's something that prepares you to go into the fight and not running away from the fight, which I think kind of much more accurately defines what we're doing here. We aren't running away from the world, but we arm ourselves with that armor. And protection, nothing to do with running away. this shar root. What's the German for an umbrella?
Schirm.
Regenschirm. Yeah, Schirm is that same word. Scharana Schirm. And also, and again, we have virtually the same word in German and English, Schild and shield. It's from that same root. So the Regenschirm, you see, the rain protector, is not something you don't run away from the rain. You're using it to go into the rain, but as a protection against getting wet in the rain. So you're not taking refuge from the rain, you're going into it, but protecting yourself from it. So Schirm and Sarana have that same kind of meaning there. Query whether the word shell comes from that same root, because the shell is like a protective armor around the soft body of a shellfish. So just.
But shell suit, you've got shell suits now.
Sorry?
You've got shell suits.
Shell suits. What were they these protective
These
suits?
modern sort of, how can I explain it?
Like boiler suits?
It's sort of, yes.
A shell suit?
Yes.
Is that a bit like those Hamza suit things that
I don't know what happens to suit is.
keep you free from contamination or something?
No.
Is it like a ranger
Yes.
shell? Yeah, I.
Oh, okay, yes.
It's a modern term for a piece of clothing.
Oh, I haven't come across
Outdoor clothing. Shell
Oh.
suit. It's
Oh. Well, I'll check that out. I hadn't heard that.
not that I possess one, I don't think.
Those German ones,
Pardon?
really expensive. The German shell. No, I think it's kind of named.
It's coming back.
Particular type of.
Hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. Online.
So we can move on.
So,
yes,
just out of curiosity, in a sense, this shell and shield just occurred to me now. Uniform does that as well. Does that come sort of from a similar vein?
uniform.
Yes.
Like uniform.
Not being uniform as well, it is
As
the
in
same as but,
military uniform.
yeah, but I mean sort of as a protection.
No, I think that the actual purpose of a uniform was just so you recognize who was a friend and who was a foe in the field of battle. But the armor, so anyway, the armor wasn't really a uniform as such.
But it was a shield, the armor.
Oh yeah, and of course the shield, you paint the colours either of your country's colours or the colour of your feudal lord. Yeah, that acted both as a uniform because you recognise friend and foe from your shield. But the meaning of the shield then was the same as the sarana. It protects you in battle rather than something you run away from battle with. So in future now, when we chant Buddhang Saranam Gacchami, I hope you have this inner sense that it's not running away, but it's strengthening you to face the vicissitudes and the dukkha of life.
But it gets more like getting protection than.
It's more of a protection and being protected so that you can go into the fight rather than something you run away from the fight too. Oh, incidentally, there is a Hindu surname, some of you may know, Sharma, and it will often be preceded by the name of the god, like Vishnu Sharma. It means, so the Sharma just means, in that context, armor. And if you're Vishnu Sharma, it means one whose armor is Vishnu, who uses Vishnu as his protection and armor. So we'll look at, we're ready at verse 9. Garavocha Nivato cha santupti cha katanyuta kalena dhammas savanam etam mangalamuttamam. One thing also I will mention about the Anuswara here, if you look at the way it's written, Mangalamuttamam, there's no Anuswara there, just an ordinary M, because it's directly followed by a word beginning with a vowel. So it has just an ordinary M. You will find, for example, in a lot of Pali poetry, and in many instances, for example, in the Karanya Metta Sutta, where that rule will be broken and that you will have a dot under the M when it's followed by a vowel. That means that you are pronouncing it as a long consonant. I'm trying to think, has anyone got a copy of the Metta Sutta here? Thanks. This is incorrectly written. Where did you get this from?
Not sure.
Asambadhang averang asapattam. Actually, rather than go into the, I think you had quite a bit of our Anuswara this time around. I will deal with the Anuswara when a vowel follows next time round, if that's all right. And because there are, Pali does depart from the norms of Sanskrit in that respect. Anyway, here, if you look at the last pada, that's the last half line, etam mangalam uttamam, the way it's done there, that is normal because you've got mangalam uttamam, you've got the M, and that's a grammatical ending M, it's the neuter ending, neuter singular ending, followed by a vowel, so it just remains as a full M. And incidentally, in the Devanagari script, it would be written as a full M there. So back to the meaning of this, garabo. There is the word garu. Same in Sanskrit and Pali, garu. Does anyone know what that word means? Heavy. Heavy? It does mean heavy. Yeah.
I'm afraid I just read it. But anyway, it is.
Sometimes I test how well people have read my notes. So garu means heavy. And it is directly cognate with the Latin word gravis, meaning heavy, which of course comes into English as grave and gravity, and words like that from Latin gravis. So I say it's that same word. So garu means heavy, but it also has a secondary meaning of somebody that is worthy of respect. A heavyweight, think of a heavyweight rather than a lightweight. They started off as terms of boxing, but then we talk about heavyweight scientist or something like that. So, and it's also echoed via Latin into English. We have the word gravity, which is just like a fact of physics. But we also have the word gravitas. If a person has gravitas, that's the idea of dignity. He commands respect, a certain gravitas about him. So there we see echoed in Latin the dual meaning that it had in Sanskrit and Pali. the primary meaning of heavy and the secondary meaning of worthy of respect. As time went on, this didn't happen in many words. It did happen as an alternative form of the word arose, but the a just became an u. So look at guru now. So we all know the word guru. It is a variant of garu. It means the heavy or the person to be respected. We are now going to make this very first word in the verse, garavo, is a derivative noun from the adjective garu. So garavo, heaviness, gravitas. What has happened here, one way of making a verb, an abstract noun out of an adjective is an adjective ending in u, you strengthen or lengthen the first syllable and the final u becomes ava. So garava, so heaviness, garu garava, so the idea of heaviness. So the idea of respectability. Also it means not just a person being worthy of respect, but it's also, having respect, having a sense of reverence. So that the garava can be a quality that the respectable person has. It can also be the feeling that you have, the sense of reverence or treating with reverence and respect. So that's the meaning of garavo here. Yeah, just the sense of being able to treat what is venerable, what is worthy of reverence, being able to give that person or idea or thing or place that same garava, having a sense of reverence towards that thing.
Respect.
Indeed so. Treating with respect. Respect again just means looking a second time for respect. But yeah, it's that same idea, the reverence, respect. Nivato, nirvana, of course, in Sanskrit, nirvana means blowing out. From the root of va, meaning to blow. Oops. So we've got va to blow. And it makes vana, like dana, jnana, vana. It means a blowing, and therefore it comes into Latin, as I've explained, as wind, ventus, and in ventilate. And via the Germanic, it's wind in German, and wind in English is from that same word. So nirvana, which in Pali becomes nibbana, means blowing out, the ordinary sense of blowing out a candle. But this is not nir, it's just a ni. Ni in the sense of down. So nivato here means, it's actually, the meaning is humility, but it means keeping out of the wind. In other words, not standing up in front. It means, retiring, making yourself small, being out of the wind, meaning just retreating, making yourself a bit small when it's appropriate to do so. The idea of humility. It might have been Voltaire who said it is a sign of greatness to know when to be small. So this is the idea. So smallness or humility, keeping out of the wind. Nivato. Santutticha katanyuta. santutti it means contentment. It's from the root Vedic root tush, and then it makes the verbal noun tushti, which means contentment, and by regular phonetic mutation, tushti, tutti, again with a subdotted T, tutti.
So what does the root tush mean again?
It means to be content.
To be
And with the prefix some, it just makes like, again, it gives the idea of the perfection or completion of something, so like a perfect contentment. It also makes another verbal noun, not tushti, but dosha, so you get santosha, and you find it in modern India as, it's used as a girl's name, it's never used as a boy's name, santosha, or in Hindi it's pronounced santosh. You will hear that name used in India, santosh, meaning contentment. So santosa and santutti are just variant forms of effectively the same word. They're variant verbal nouns from the santush.
So why does the H appear in a lot of places when it changes from Sanskrit to a double consonant and an H appears?
Okay, I will deal with that. Right.
And a lot of places it happens.
Virtually invariably. What happens is, where you have in Sanskrit an S followed by a stop being a t, p, k, ch. So let's take Sanskrit word skanda, which originally actually means the shoulder, but then comes to mean an aggregate or group of things. Well, we know that Pali will not tolerate the consonant cluster. Pali can't have a sk, so it will just drop the S. But now this now comes right back to the heart of your question, Iris. When this happens, the S will drop, but the k now will become aspirated automatically as it switches from Sanskrit to Pali. That is why the sk becomes a k in Pali, and the rest of the word is the same. So that's that explains kanta.
That it's virtually natural to do that, isn't it? Skirt and it's virtually natural the way we are speaking it. Skirt and skirt.
Well, everywhere else seen them manage. I wonder why they did it. Why did they do it? It's so I mean, in the languages, it went through the languages of, from Vedic through Sanskrit and through the languages into the colloquial languages. It happened across the board. I mean, even modern Hindi, for example, you can see that same.
But that's
same
what we're
phenomenon.
doing. If we're talking sort of skirt, it would be short or k. You're breathing out. You can't say the K in another format. Skirt, sure, but k is more breathing out, sort of. It doesn't make sense. But
Does it make that so?
skirt can be quite short, but
Skirt.
I'm breathing out when I'm saying k.
Yeah, the breathing out appears to be a kind of subconscious linguistic phenomenon compensating for the loss of the S. So not just Skandha, colloquially then in Pali and the other Middle Indian languages, Kanda. And it happens again across the board. We've just seen in Tushti, Tutti. So what's happened here? We've got the consonant cluster. Sorry, my mistake. Some dot here as well. Tushti. So we've got this consonant cluster which resolves itself into a double consonant. But in addition to that, because the S is dropped there, or sh in this case, it's compensated for by making it aspirated. And for example, the simple Sanskrit asti means is. Cognate with the Latin est, German ist. What happens here? Again, the consonant cluster. So that becomes a double t, but the loss of the s is compensated for by making it an aspirate. So asti in Sanskrit, atti in Pali. And this is such a regular phenomenon across the languages. You can say it's a rule.
But it's natural to want to breathe out at that point.
Well, they wouldn't be saying it breathing in.
Oh.
No, it doesn't work.
But you don't say asti. You say asti, and then atti. It's a t.
Yeah, it was very interesting among those who spoke these languages colloquially. Remember, effectively, Pali is just like a colloquial version of Sanskrit. That's essentially that's what it is. Certainly, it was a natural phenomenon. I don't know how it arose, but it was a natural phenomenon in the Ganges Valley at the time. They dropped the S and replaced it by the aspiration.
But the colloquial language, you don't make your life more difficult, do you?
In many respects we do, but in this respect they did simplify the language as they.
I just wonder whether you could see similarities in things like Scouse or whatever colloquial languages you have.
Well, when it came into the Germanic languages and the Slavonic languages, they didn't have any difficulty doing it. It was just in the languages of northern India, or let's say the colloquial languages of northern India that derived ultimately from Vedic Pali showed this phenomenon.
Right, could you tell me again what san, the prefix san on the santity means?
Okay, it's the direct cognate of the Latin co and com.
To complete.
Mm.
And before, we've talked about sam before,
Yeah.
for the same thing, samsara.
It's
being
the same,
complete.
yeah.
So san and sam as prefixes.
Ah, yes. Now, we have the prefix sam. If you write it on its own, say a grammarian is saying, now I'm going to discuss the prefix sam, he'll just write it as S-A-M. When it's joined to a following word, one of two things can happen, or rather, you have two options. You can either treat it as two separate words and apply the rules of samsara and write it as samsara, or more commonly, you can treat it as an integral part of the word. So let me give you okay, so the way it's written here, let's look at this word santutti by way of example. So we've got, you could see could see it written like that. In here, it's written as Santukti with an N. It's equally correct to write it like that, or as it's written in this typescript here. It's a bit like words that I was describing earlier with a cha and a buddhancha. You can write with an anuswara followed by cha, or with the actual full consonant buddhancha. The same rules apply to the prefix sam. Now, samsara, because it's followed by a sibilant, this now is exactly the same in Sanskrit and Pali. We've got this anuswara followed by the sibilant sa. So in Sanskrit and in Pali, as it we can all say with almost certain that in Pali, as it was spoken at the time of the Buddha, the language, it would have been pronounced as the nasal. So I was explaining sansara. Sansara. In Pali, again, I often will pronounce it, particularly if Rachel Hall is listening, she'll, whenever I say something, it sounds a bit, it says Pali, not Sanskrit. Sorry, ma'am, that's Rachel Hall's chanting practice. In Pali, you tend to pronounce it sang-sar, as if it's sang, with as if like the English sound, so it's under the influence of Thai. If I'm being really academic and purist about it, I can get away with it because Rachel isn't listening. I would tend to say sansara, but with the knowledge that very few people nowadays would pronounce it that way, unless they're from the homeland of the Buddha, in which case they would pronounce it sansara. In fact, in modern Hindi, for example, okay, well, Hindi is the native language of where the Buddha lived. And they would pronounce it the same as that French nasal vowel, sansar. They wouldn't say sansar, sansar. But don't fret about it. And if Rachel Hall is there, always make it a sound sansar. But the thing is, there are valid differences of pronunciation. In Sri Lanka, they would pronounce it as sansara.
It's more the prefix having the same meaning, SAN and SAM.
It is the same word, it just varies because it's got this m sound that wants to change itself to adjust itself to the following consonant. But it is exactly the same word. And so it's the co and the con in Latin, which we have so many words in English. And it's also cognate with the SYN in Greek, which is the same word, like synthesis, syndrome. So the synthesis, we have our Sanskrit word sandhi, meaning putting together. Sanskrit sandhi and Greek synthesis are etymologically the same word, putting together. Oh, goodness me, it's 8:10. It's tea time. I'm happy to announce that you've now got a new link captain installed this morning. Witnessing installation, and it's ready and work.
So which flavor would you like?
And easy, but if there's something like a masala chai or something, if they have that. Otherwise, any of that will be fine. Pause the recording for our tea break.